guys, welcome back to the channel. I know I've been away for a while, but during this time I had my daily exam, I had my first shot of Pfizer, and I read the last two books of the 5 classic Spanish books that I'm sharing today. And before we get started, I gotta make a disclaimer. So the 5 classic Spanish books that I share today do not include Latin American literature. So when I say these 5 books are probably the most well-known or the most classic Spanish literature, I'm not taking into account works like 100 Años de Soledad or El Amor en los Tiempos de Cólera, both written by Gabriel García Márquez, who's Colombian, and whose works are definitely classics in the Spanish language. But today, we'll only be focusing on Spanish literatures in Spain. So with that in mind, let's get started. First of all, I want to discuss with you guys why I recommend reading classic Spanish literatures. Well, don't get me wrong here. What I actually recommend is to read simple, abridged version of these classic literatures. I know that at this point, there might be people thinking or shouting out loud that you're gonna miss a lot if you read the abridged version and you don't get to feel the power of the language in the original work. I'm sure there's gonna be a whole list of reasons that I can't even deny, but at the same time, I don't think it's feasible for a language learner to be able to understand, let's say, Don Quixote, which was written in el siglo de oro, and even Spanish people find it hard to understand. However, I do think it's essential for a serious Spanish learner to have a basic idea of what Don Quixote is about or who Sancho Panza is, because after all, it's a classic. So what do we do if we are not capable of understanding the original work? While we want to know what the story is about, unless you're reading a translated version, an abridged version is probably our best bet. And why are we reading these? Of course, because we're cultured people with fine tastes. Now remember, we're still reading the abridged version of these books. Okay, so jokes aside, the reason why I recommend reading classic Spanish books or stories is because literature plays a rather important role in culture, and understanding the cultural references is as important as understanding slangs. So for example, if you're new at work and the guy in the office makes a pass at you, and just when you are wondering if you should go out with him, your colleague tells you, he said Don Juan. And at this point, if you have any knowledge at all of who Don Juan is or what it means, you'll probably save yourself some heartbreak. And now let's get started with the books. So the first book that I recommend is unquestionably Don Quixote, written by Miguel de Cervantes. So the book contains 2 parts. The first one was published in 1605, and the second one arrived 10 years later in 1615. And during this 10-year period in the year 1614, an author, or maybe a group of authors, wrote under the name of Avellaneda, and they published an unauthorized and unofficial sequel of the first part of Don Quixote. So how did Cervantes respond to this fanfic? In my opinion, his way of response is quite brilliant. So he actually incorporated the fake sequel into his own legitimate one. So in his own book, Don Quixote, the protagonist of the book, discovered this fake sequel, and he learned how he was portrayed in this fake book. He was really pissed off by all the inaccuracies in the book, and by doing this, Cervantes made sure that every time somebody read the real one, the fake one got mocked. So back to the story, Don Quixote is pretty much a delusional middle-aged hidalgo. Hidalgo means that he's some sort of nobleman, but of minor nobility. And his problem is that he spent so much time reading chivalry novels, which was quite popular at that time, that he starts to think that he is a knight, and a valiant one. And so he decides to embark on a journey to fight the evils together with his little servant Sancho Panza, who is literate but very grounded. And he's the one who pulls Don Quixote from time to time from his imaginary little world to the real one. And in my opinion, this stark contrast between these 2 characters is what makes the book so enticing and so entertaining. I still remember how hard I laughed when I read the part in which Don Quixote was battling against windmills, firmly believing that these windmills were actually giants. And ridiculous plots like this leaves a really deep impression on readers' minds, and it does make the satire more powerful on the dominating but repetitive chivalry themes in that age, which, as you guys can see, has pretty much brainwashed Don Quixote. And this is why Don Quixote has become a synonym of impractical idealists. So many believe that Don Quixote is the first modern novel in history because of the way how it developed its characters and how it offers different perspectives. So instead of focusing the story on heroic feats like all other medieval books, Cervantes put more effort in developing the inner world of the character. And by the end of the books, readers can tell how the characters like Don Quixote and Sancho Panza have changed because of the influence of each other. For example, Don Quixote becomes more realistic, while Sancho Panza becomes a bit more idealistic. So the second book that I recommend today is called El Lazarillo de Tormes. So this book was published anonymously in the year 1554. Why was it anonymous? Because this book reveals the hypocrisy and the cruelty of the Catholic Church and its pious members. So back in that time, the Catholic Church was really, really powerful, and the Spanish Inquisition was formed as well. So what is Spanish Inquisition? Basically, it is a violent campaign aimed to eradicate the heresies of the Spanish kingdom. So back in that time, there were Jews, there were Muslims, there were Christians living all together in this region. And of course, they have different religious beliefs. And the point of the Spanish Inquisition is to purge this diversity and to persecute those who were not Catholic. So as you guys can see how powerful the Catholic Church was at that time, a book like this was naturally published anonymously because after all, who would want trouble with the Catholic Church? So this book was actually banned for quite a long time. The circulation of an abridged version was only allowed in late 16th century, and the unabridged version didn't really meet the public until the 19th century. So overall, I think this book is a really easy read and the plots are also easy to follow. Lázaro or Lazarillo is the name of the protagonist, a poor boy who was born by the river Tormes, a river in Salamanca. As I just mentioned, Lázaro was born into a poor family, so his mom asked a ciego, a blind man, to take Lázaro as a guide and to take care of him. And by the way, if you ever hear the expression said when Lazarillo, it means to be somebody's guide, which apparently comes from this book. But unfortunately, the ciego treated Lázaro horribly. And actually, there are 7 chapters in this book altogether. And in each chapter, there is a new master with different occupations, but none of them treated Lázaro right. Not even the priests or people who work for the church. But luckily, Lázaro is a really smart kid and he always outwits his masters, no matter how cruel or astute they are. And this is actually what makes the book so interesting to read. So even though the purpose of this book is to review the cruelty and hypocrisy of the Catholic Church, and of course the kind of misery that Spain was in during that period of time, you don't quite feel that kind of happiness as you read this book, and instead you're gonna find a lot of conversations and interesting plots that will keep you engaged. Of course, if you read between the lines, you will see the sarcasm. So the last thing about this book that I think is worth mentioning is its genre. So El Lazarillo de Tormes established the style of picaresque, or in Spanish picaresca, coming from the word pícaro, which pretty much means rogue. So picaresque novels are usually written in first person, so it's sort of like an autobiography, and the protagonist of the book usually comes from a lower social class like Lázaro, and they'll have to count on their own wit to survive in a corrupt society. And so in the novel, there's going to be a series of adventures of the character, but these adventures are only very loosely connected, and throughout the book there's no character development. Lazarillo is still Lazarillo. He didn't get rich, he didn't get poor, he didn't get sick. He is still him, unlike what I just said in Don Quixote, which actually incorporates character development. And the most important feature of this genre is that they normally adopt a realistic style. And so they present you what the society is really like, and there's almost always an element of satire. In this video, I'll only introduce these 2 books to you guys, and I'll leave the other 3 books to the next video. Otherwise, this video would be running incredibly long. I'm hoping to include as much important information as possible as I introduce the book, so that even if you guys don't have the time to read all of them, or you don't want to read all of them, this video can provide you with all the basic information that you need to know about these books. Thank you for spending the time with me, and I will see you guys in the next one pretty soon. Muy pronto. Ciao!